How's it going, everybody? Brandon Rust here from Bokashi Earthworks. Today, I wanted to talk about the science of humic and fulvic acids. So, what I did is I put together a little overview to help you guys understand how humic and fulvic acids work. And I can break down all the differences and the similarities between humic and fulvic acids, what they do biochemically in the soil, what they do in the plant, how they interact with nutrient ions. And so we'll get started here shortly. It's time for a bong hit. So grab yourself a pipe, a bong, a joint, and we'll get started here soon. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I wanted to start off by saying that tonight at 7 p.m. Central, we'll be doing a live and we're going to be auctioning off some Chem D Cross to Black Lime Reserve. I'm only going to auction off 2 cuts. I did not release the seeds. Other than these 2 cuts, nothing has been released. And I will not do another release for about 6 months. So that will be this evening. All right, let's get into it. So I know a lot of you guys are interested in organic farming, interested in ways and methods to increase both the quality of your plants, the health of your plants, but also the quality and health of your soil. And so humic and fulvic acids, those are kind of my thing. You guys already know I sell the humate fertilizer and that I work with NASA Agricultural Technologies, which is my business partners when it comes to the manufacturing. So first going to get into the origins and composition. So humic substances are complex heterogeneous mixtures formed via the microbial decomposition of geochemical transformation of plants, animals, and microbial residues. They are the major component of soil organic matter, SOM, commonly abbreviated in science white papers, and are categorized into humic acid, fulvic acid, and humin. So the humic and fulvic acids, I know you guys kind of already know what those are, but humin is the insoluble fraction that isn't soluble at any pH range. And so when this is extracted from the humic material, it is separated out, and it's basically just, it can be used as a soil conditioner. It's basically just different carbon that isn't soluble. The fractions are not, these fractions aren't pure compounds, but operationally defined by color. So when we're talking about humic and fulvic acids, there are different compounds that are classified as both humic and fulvic acids based off of both of their molecular weight, their solubility in pH, their color is really how they look at them, and the way that they actually react with the plant and the soil system. So fulvic acids, they're soluble across all pH ranges, 1 to 14. So extremely acidic to extremely alkaline. They have a lower molecular weight, typically between 500 and 2000 DA. And it's a yellow to light brown color. Humic acids are only soluble I believe, I know this already, but I believe they're only soluble in slightly alkaline or higher pH levels. And the molecular weight is higher, usually 3,000 to 30,000 DA. It's dark brown. Human is insoluble, completely insoluble at all pH ranges. And the reason why is because it has a higher molecular weight, usually above 100,000 DA. And it's just black. It's just black material, mostly just insoluble carbon and insoluble carbon complex. Humic acid precipitates at a low pH, and it's soluble in neutral and alkaline conditions. So that's the difference. So it'll precipitate, and it's only above 2, and it's only soluble in neutral and alkaline pHs. So that means any of the nutrient ions that are attached to the humic acid, it usually needs to, for them to be bioavailable to the plant, it needs to be at either a neutral or slightly or alkaline pH. Fulvic acid remains soluble across the board. pH, like I said before, 1 to 14 due to its lower molecular weight and high oxygen content. Hey, what up, Paul? I see Paul's in here. He's texting as Bokashi Earthworks right now. Functional groups. Okay, so both fulvic acid and humic acid are comprised of mainly carboxylic acids, which is negative anion. It's COOH. So it's carbon, oxygen, oxygen, and hydrogen. And if you were to look at it, you know, COOH, you could go here. Let me see. I've got this little whiteboard right here. Let me see if I can get on it and kind of show you guys visually how these things work, because they're very similar to, like, I like to think of these humic and fulvic acids kind of like Legos, right? These carbon chains are the building blocks of all organic compounds. And a carboxylic acid group, COOH, I don't know if you guys can see that very well. But what happens is you can also have a COOH and a COOH. So these things can actually branch off and make these larger carbon compounds, and they can be really large, considering that this is the smallest of them. So it kind of works like Legos, where it can kind of construct off of those carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen groups. And the reason why this can also, here, actually, I'm going to bring this back. I forgot one little part of it. Okay, so whenever you have these chains, you start building these chains, right? So let's say you have COO, and then you have Fe2+. What happens is wherever there's hydrogen groupings on these chains, so let's say this is a big chain, and this chain is taking up the whole board, right? Anytime there's a hydrogen grouping, it can be exchanged for iron, manganese, zinc, copper, metal ions, calcium, Ca2+, magnesium, Mg2+. All of these can be exchanged. And the reason why is because hydrogen is a really, really strange element. If you're looking at hydrogen, it's the first element on the periodic table, and it's different from all the other elements because it actually has no neutron. All other elements are a proton, an electron, and a neutron, except for hydrogen. Hydrogen can actually exist as, this is H, as a proton and an electron, no neutron. Now, but it can also exist just as a proton, a hydrogen ion, positively charged hydrogen ion, or it can just exist as an electron. And what happens is when we're talking about how chemistry works, you have these outer orbitals and they have to equal 8, right? And so when you have, chemicals that are bonded together, they're sharing the hydrogen, and the hydrogen is actually exchanging back and forth. So the hydrogen will actually exchange for those metal alloyed ions because of the hydrogen bonding. Now, I'm not a chemist at all. I've never taken chemistry. And this is just my basic fundamental understanding of how this works and the best way that I can describe it so that way you guys can understand. But the chemical functional groups are carboxylic acids, like I just showed, phenolic hydroxyls, or OH ions, ketones, quinones, alcohols, and alpha aromatic and alpha-matic carbon skeletons. So that is what functionally makes up humic and fulvic acids, are those types of compounds. And if you look at what those are, they're basically different types of carbon structures, because it's not just building COOH, it's also building the OH groupings and also the ketones and the alcohols and all those other things. Fulvic acid has a higher oxygen to carbon ratio than humic acid, making fulvic acid more chemically reactive. It's better at chelating nutrient ions, and it is also more mobile because of that. Also because of the molecular weight. The smaller the molecular weight, the easier it is to move both in solution, in the soil, and also to pass through the barriers that it needs to get into the roots or into the cells of the actual plant. So biochemically, the way that humic and fulvic acids function in soil is they form stable organic complexes with micronutrients, like I kind of displayed here on the chart, and macronutrients. That's what humic and fulvic acids. Fulvic acids, with their lower molecular weight and greater mobility, chelate nutrients more efficiently and improve their bioavailability. Now, you have to remember, if you are operating in a slightly acidic or acidic soil, humic acids are going to be less beneficial when it comes to the release of nutrient ions, things like iron, zinc, manganese, copper, calcium, and magnesium. However, if your soil pH ranges are neutral or slightly alkaline, it will be able to release that. So this is one of the things to think about when we're talking about humic acids, and I wanted to touch on heavy metals real quick. They don't just create organic complexes with micronutrients, but they also do that with things like arsenic, cadmium, lead, these heavy metals that you don't want in the soil. Now, if you're trying to use something like fulvic acid to decrease the availability, the bioavailability of heavy metals in the soil, it would not be a good idea. And the reason is because the humic acid will create those complexes. And if we're operating in the pH ranges that we typically operate between about 6.3 and 6.7 in, living soil anyway, in a soil mix, it'll complex those heavy metals and they won't be available. But if you're in an alkaline soil, those heavy metals that are being complexed with the humic acid can become bioavailable. So it's one of the things to think about. If you're using humic acid to complex heavy metals to keep them from being uptaken by your plant, you want to make sure that the media is at the right pH range. Fulvic acids, they have the lower weight, greater mobility, chelate nutrients more efficiently, and improve their bioavailability. They also help to act as natural pH buffers, regulating soil pH and improving nutrient availability in the rhizosphere. and they absorb both acidic and basic ions, stabilizing nutrient supply. So when we're thinking about soil colloids, they have a negative charge. And so things like nitrate, phosphate, and sulfates, they do not adhere and stay in the soil. And that's why they're more prone to leaching. But when you add humic and fulvic acids, they have different types of groups on here that are not just negative like the soil colloids, but they also have positive charges. That means things like nitrate and phosphate and sulfate will actually adhere and be organically complexed, so that way they don't leach out into the waterways. That's one of a huge benefit, especially if you're like doing conventional farming and you're using a salt-based synthetic fertilizer like diammonium phosphate or monopotassium phosphate or anything like that. Those phosphates, they leach off into the waterways. They cause algal blooms, which decrease the oxygen. The water becomes anoxic, and then fish die and aquatic life die. Humic and fulvic acids can mitigate those negative environmental hazards. So let's talk about the interactions with soil microorganisms. So they serve as carbon and energy sources for microbial communities. When we're talking about microbes, unless we're talking about a photosynthetic microorganism, their energy source is going to be derived from the apatite material or the soil organic matter, the organic carbon content, whether that's humic and fulvic acids, whether that's amino acids, whether that is lignin and cellulose and decomposing organic matter, peat. All of these different things act as either housing for the biology or for energy itself. They promote beneficial microbial communities like Trichoderma, Pseudomonas, Azospirillum. So all of the types of microorganisms that we want that are doing other different types of biochemical work, like creating enzymes, amino acids, phytohormones, antimicrobial compounds, they'll actually stimulate that biology as well. Fulvic acids increase microbial respiration and nitrification, while humic acids improve microbial colonization and biofilm formation on root surfaces. So humic acids, because they are a larger molecule, they are less used for energy mechanics and more used for the actual housing of the biology. The larger organic molecules aid in things like creating better soil structure, which leads to better gas and air exchange, better water exchange, which will also intensify the ability for the microbial communities to proliferate in that media. Also, whenever you're creating biofilms, they aggregate soil particles and they create better soil structure, but they also create the biofilms that nitrogen fixing bacteria colonize and will fix, because they have to be protected from oxygen. So these biofilms can protect the nitrogen fixing bacteria so they can fix atmospheric nitrogen and convert it with the enzyme nitrogenase into plant available ammonium. Also, these biofilms can cover the colloids, and it can create conditions in where nutrient ions can be easier complexed, and it also can keep nutrient ions like iron and manganese from oxidizing and becoming unavailable. They also increase CEC, cation exchange capacity, due to high negative charges on carboxylic and phenolic groups. And also positive, they have some positive charges as well. I mentioned this before. They will chelate those nutrient ion. When we're talking about chelation, it's basically organic complexion. So chelate is Greek for claw, so it means to grab onto. And when it grabs on to those nutrient ions, it keeps them from oxidizing or changing their form. And most of the micronutrients are available in their what's called their reduced form. So in the presence of oxygen, things like ferric iron will turn into oxidized iron, which you would see as rust or that red coloration in clay soils. You want it in its ferric form, which is actually kind of bluish green. Humic acid binds with ammonium, phosphate, and potassium, improving retention in sandy soils or soils that have high leaching. So what we're talking about is the humic acid will actually coat the different types of soil colloids, and it will keep those nutrient ions bioavailable. So plant interactions and uptake. Root uptake and transport. So fulvic acids can cross cell membranes via endocytosis or diffusion due to their small size. And so when you have fulvic acid that are organically complexed with nutrient ions like iron, manganese, zinc, copper, calcium, and magnesium, they can be transported without having to use any energy. When you can reduce the amount of energy that the plant has to utilize for the uptake of the nutrients, it can direct that energy to different parts of its metabolism, maybe to, increase its, and upregulate the genes responsible for resistance to pathogens. This is just theoretical. I'm just giving you a hypothetical scenario. One of the other things is also when I think about a plant and I think about the majority of the nutrient ions that are being taken up, they have a positive charge. And just like a battery, you can only charge a battery so much. So if you're taking up calcium or magnesium in its divalent form, Ca2 plus or Mg2 plus, the plant can't continue to just uptake positively charged ions. So it does a couple of things. It takes up negatively charged ions to balance that charge, that internal charge. So phosphate, sulfate, nitrate, silicate, all those elements help balance that charge balance inside the plant. But when you have an organic complex nutrient ion, it neutralizes that charge. So it can be taken up without the plant having to use something like its sodium potassium pump, where it's releasing potassium or sodium ions so it can continue to take up positively charged ions, or where it is releasing carbon dioxide, CO3, which is or CO2 or CO3, depending on what the plant is needing to do, or releasing some type of exudate to balance that charge. So when it comes to the actual energy mechanics of the plant, it can aid in those energy mechanics because the plant is not spending energy to release things into the soil to balance that, and so it can focus that energy on other metabolic processes. Let's see. Humic acids primarily interact with root surface proteins and trigonal signal cascades. They also can help develop root architecture and modulation. So they induce lateral root proliferation and elongation via auxin-like activity. And they also upregulate genes like LBD16 and ARF7, enhancing nutrient foraging. So one of the benefits is if your plants have made some type of association, like mycorrhizal association with something like Glomus intraradices or Trichoderma or Beauveria bassiana or a wide different, there's tons of different ones that can do this. You're essentially supplying them with a food and energy source. Now, they also are responsible for some intracellular and metabolic functions in plants. So fulvic acid aids to enhance ATP production. ATP is a phosphate compound that is it is considered the energy exchange currency of all cellular mechanics. So it enhances energy production via stimulation of the electron transport chain in mitochondria. So it stimulates the transport of electrons in the mitochondria of the plant. And if you don't know about the mitochondria, plant has two sets of DNA. They has mitochondrial DNA, and then they have another set of DNA. And it is theorized that plants, that two different bacterias, one of it actually consumed the other, and instead of killing it off, it became a part of it and started creating synergy within that system. It's how plants were formed from bacteria millions and millions of years ago. This weed is fucking really good, man. I'm on a motherfucking roll. I'm in the zone right now. But I also did write out a bunch of stuff and print it out. So antioxidant activities as well. So both fulvic acid and humic acid increase the expression of antioxidant enzymes, protecting against oxidative stress. This is really important, especially when we're talking about nitrogen fixing bacteria. So if you're using something like azospirillum or any type of nitrogen fixing bacteria, they are really susceptible to oxygen atmosphere, and they function best in anoxic or anaerobic low oxygen parts of the soil or in biofilms. It's one of the reasons why legume crops create those root nodules, because those root nodules, they're living in the root nodule, and that root nodule is actually protecting them from the oxidation, particularly protecting the enzyme that they produce, nitrogenase, because it's an iron molybdenum complex. It's very susceptible to oxidation. Also, oxidation occurs in the soil. It changes the charge density on the micronutrients. So you might go, when ferric iron, Fe2 plus is oxidized, it converts into Fe3 plus, which is far less available, if at all. And so we want to keep the micronutrients in a reduced form, but we also need to get oxygen to the roots. So there's kind of this weird balance that's going on where you don't want the nutrients to oxidize, but you need enough oxygen for microbial respiration and for the roots. So it's kind of a balancing act. And one of the things that can happen is when you're using humic and fulvic acids, you can create better synergy with that balance. They also are responsible for metabolic enzyme activation. So it activates nitrate reductase and hydrogen ATPase, which enhances nutrient uptake and energy mechanics in plant. It also increases chlorophyll content and photosynthetic rates. Remember, when we're stimulating mitochondrial DNA, it is going to upregulate genes that will create more robust, vigorous plants that are both healthier and produce a greater amount of both metabolites, secondary metabolites, primary metabolites. A good example of this is if you get a really nice, healthy tomato, it's going to have higher quantities of things like lycopene in it, which is good for heart health. If you're growing cannabis, you're going to get a higher quantity of things like terpenes and flavonoids and thiols and all of the fucking chemicals that we're looking for. So we want to see an increase in the actual nutrition in our food. So we want higher iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, calcium, magnesium, all the amino acids, enzymes, all those things that are going to benefit all the cells in our body. Because you have to remember, fertilization, and even when we feed ourselves, we're not feeding ourselves. We're actually feeding our cells. And that's why our stomach, which is the rhizosphere of the soil, is breaking down all of things. It's digesting these so that way we can get molecular compounds that can pass through the cells and feed our cells. Humic acid. I think that was it. I think that was all she. No, here we go. I got two more pages that I wrote out. I'll put these in the Dropbox so you guys can see these as well. If you want the Dropbox, you can either email me, DM me on Instagram, and there's hundreds. I mean, hundreds. Every single white paper that I come across that I like, the really good ones that are like really pertinent and play a big role in what I do, I print them out, I read through them, I highlight everything. That way I have reference points because my brain is overflowing sometimes. Plant growth and yield enhancement. So there are numerous field studies that have shown, and again, you can look at all of these. I should actually have given you all of the references for the agronomic papers and science research papers where all this information was actually pulled from. But increases root biomass and shoot dry weight, enhances nutrient density. We talked about that. Increases, and it has shown increases in yield from 10 to 30% depending on crop and application rates. Humic and fulvic acids also have wonderful environmental benefits. Again, I'm just repeating myself at this point, but reducing nitrate, phosphate, sulfate leaching, by improving ECE and nutrient retention, improving soil aggregation, water retention, and gas and air exchange, sequestering carbon, aiding and it aids in, the mitigation of the loss of carbon from our soils from conventional agriculture practices. That's a lot. This is going to be chocked full of tons of great information. I'll save this and you guys can watch it later. So now I'm going to get to the part where I just wrote some of the key differences so that you guys can understand. So the key differences between humic and fulvic acids, one is going to be solubility. So humic acid is insoluble in low pHs. Fulvic acid is soluble across the board in all pH ranges. 2, the molecular weight. I want to say DA as it's abbreviated is Dalton, but 3,000 to 30,000 Dalton and for humic acids, and then which is really high, and then the molecular weight of fulvic acids is 500 to 2,000, which is extremely low. Also, the colors they vary. Humic acid is dark brown to black. Fulvic acid is usually yellow to light brown. And that's because the amount of light that can actually shine through, like if you were to put humic acid and fulvic acid in the same quantity in the same quantity of water, the reason why is because larger molecules won't let as much light to pass through. So the lower molecular, you'll see it different. Anyway, nutrient chelation. Humic acid is very strong, but less mobile. Humic acids are better for heavy metal remediation. Fulvic acids are highly mobile and extremely efficient at chelating nutrients. That is one of the reasons why, if you look at our product, the majority of the compounds that are in here are the fulvic acids, 44.37% on the complex versus the 1.63 humic acid. Fulvic acid is king when it comes to chelating nutrients, keeping those nutrients bioavailable, transporting those nutrients across cellular membranes, and for microbial fuel. Bioavailability. So humic acids are less bioavailable due to their size, but they do allow the housing of biology. The bioavailability of fulvic acids is extremely high and can penetrate directly through cell membranes. Not just in plants, but in people too. So if you are taking, let's say, a micronutrient supplement, you should be taking your micronutrient supplement with fulvic acid, because that fulvic acid will chelate those micronutrients and create situations in your body where they can be transported across those cellular membranes extremely efficiently. We'll also do a Q&A here after I'm almost done. We've got one more. So soil interactions. So humic acid enhances the cation exchange capacity and influences soil structure. Anytime you do just those two things, you're going to see a lot of things happen from a biochemical and from a microbial standpoint. Soil interactions with fulvic acid, again, microbial food enhances nutrient uptake. So that is my presentation that I put together for you guys for this particular live. Now is the time for Q&A. So I know that was probably a lot. I'm sure it was a ton to soak up if you've been here from the beginning. I'm going to scroll through some of these comments. Can microbes break down human? I wouldn't think so. And the reason why is because if you look at, let's say, peat, for instance, peat is really, really hard to break down because of its structure. So when you have a really high molecular weight and you have a carbon chains that are that large, I think that they're a lot less. I mean, they're not as easy to rip apart. They're very stable. That's one of the things. That's why they're not soluble at any pH range, is because those carbon chains are extremely stable. Oh, shoot. Go vote. Paul's putting a thing. Oh, yeah. Somebody nominated me for educational speaker of the year. And apparently you can go to the Oklahoma Music Awards and vote. I think there's 3 people that were nominated by several different people. You had to have several nominations, I guess. I found out about it because they sent me an email and told me, and I didn't even know it was a thing. So I thought that was really cool. Whoever did that, I think Clone might have done that, and some of you other guys. So I appreciate the support. It means a lot. No, I'm definitely not a chemist. I do read books. I do have some chemistry books and stuff, but the more I read, the more I understand. And even if it's not taught like at a university level, as long as I have the basic fundamentals, it gives me a better understanding, and I can take a holistic approach to whatever it is that I'm doing. What is the best iron supplement? Well, the most efficient is EDTA, chelated iron, because it's usually the cheapest. However, it's synthetically produced, and I'm not a big fan of that. Also, because the EDTA will subside inside of the plant. And so, my go-to is iron sulfate. It's a naturally occurring mineral sulfate. It can oxidize really easily, and that's why I like to use the iron sulfate. And then I like to also add, like, if I'm watering it in, I'm gonna water it in with like Microbe Plus or the Bacillus and Trichoderma, or I'll add it in with fulvic acid, like the humate. That way it stays in a bioavailable form, because iron sulfate will oxidize pretty easy. But also, like nitrogen meals, like if you're using blood meal for a nitrogen source, that actually contains a pretty decent amount of iron, and it is already organically complexed. And the calcium, yeah, calcium has a small amount of iron. It's less than 1%. It's only I think it's only 0.3% iron. Oh, yeah, yeah. I hope you read it. I still haven't even had a chance yet. I got to take the paper home with me today. Just going through comments. You just got your shipping email. Yeah, yeah. The mailman just came by right before I started this live and scanned all the packages. Packages go out every single day, with the exception of like Sunday, sometimes Wednesday, but it just depends if I take those days off. Sunday, they don't go out because mail doesn't run. Where can I get that iron? You can get iron sulfate on Amazon. You probably get like a pound of it for like $15 or something. Yeah, but Calcium doesn't have a lot of iron in it, although it does have. I do not sell any iron supplements anymore. I used to sell all of the mineral sulfates, but it just created a logistic nightmare because it added like an additional 15 items that I had to have labels for, constantly keep inventory, keep packaging, and they weren't being bought frequently enough to justify having them on the website. So I did what any good business owner would do if it doesn't make money, it doesn't make sense. And it didn't make sense because it wasn't making money. So I eliminated those. Derek Frick. One of the best way to get things more balanced is to do soil analytics. So before you begin your run, you can get a soil test at Logan Labs. And if you start doing those, what you can do is you can analyze what's in there and look at what the target should be and amend just based off of what needs to be there. So you're never over fertilizing and you're creating balance between the nutrients in that media. Oh yeah, recently expanded a batch of microbes with equal parts fulvic acid. Don't know what to expect, just an experiment. So if you use fulvic acid, what you expect is a pretty high production rate. I expect that if you also use a carbohydrate along with that fulvic acid, that what you'll see is the fermentation process going very fast. That's probably why your caps already broke. And yeah, you can do that with the Micro Plus. I I have done that. I have actually produced microbe plus from spores, just like I always do with fulvic acid, just as an experiment. Um, and it'll give you even more benefits because that fulvic acid will, when you're adding it with your, into your soil with the microbes, it'll do all of those things that we talked about. Oh yeah, adenosine triphosphate, ATP, the energy exchange currency for all cellular mechanics. Sulfur, you're probably not lacking sulfur. Honestly, if you're using things like Epsom salt or gypsum or any of the micronutrient sulfates, you are probably just fine, if not high. Aloha, Greg. Thanks for joining. If you don't already know Greg, he is an OG. Should you be fermenting those roots? You've got a lot of feral and native legume species. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. So though inside of those nodes are nitrogen fixing bacteria, and they function best in anaerobic environments. So fermentation happens in those anaerobic environments. So I would assume or hypothesize, uh, by logical deduction, that would be an excellent thing to do. Go ahead and get some of those up, chop them up really finely. The finer that you chop them up, the rate of reaction will increase. So do it. I recommend it. I finally got quality from synthetic, but I'm replacing CalMag with Calcil and Epsom foiler and replacing bagged microbes for Microbe Plus on one plant and do all synth on the other and compare. Yeah, that's cool too. If you want to do synthetic, you can use the humate fertilizer and you just use about 2 to 3 milliliters per gallon of water, but you decrease your base. So you'd add your humates first, and then you add your A and B, but you can decrease your A and B by up to 60% if you're using it in conjunction with your humate. And then what's going to happen is that's going to decrease a lot of the precipitation reactions that occur because the fulvic acid will complex those nutrient ions. And so you don't have to worry so much about creating a lot of runoff because you're not going to cause osmotic stress with the excess salt buildup in the media. It is going to be organically complexed nutrient ions as opposed to precipitants and salt-based ions. Does too much humic acid affect secondary metabolite production negatively? It's a good question. Let's think about this from a logical perspective. What we just learned that while humic acid can increase your ECE, it is less bioavailable. And so the nutrient ions that it is organically complexing, in theory, are going to be less bioavailable. So what humic acid can do is you can add more nutrient ions into a soil, have a higher ECE, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be bioavailable or soluble in your soil solution. They act more for long-term benefit, for the gradual long-term release of nutrient ions. So if we're thinking about it from that perspective, I think that if you did too much humic acid and you started to complex your nutrient ions and they become less bioavailable, I would assume that not just secondary metabolite production, but overall plant functions that are relative to nutrient uptake could potentially be slowed. The real question here is how much is too much? Because that is the data that we probably don't have. At what rates do we see maximum results? At what rates do we start seeing antagonisms? What is the best cheese cultivar that I have ever grown or smoked? UK cheese. It's the only cheese that I've ever smoked. There is a variety that was, I think, either bred and selected by Maui Fire Farms out in Maui. It's called Sour Sop. And it is the cheesiest thing I have ever smoked, tasted. It won first place judges pick. It won first place, I think, best sativa, first place indoor at that cup. It literally took all of the categories. I tried to get them for such a long time to let me get a cut of that, and it didn't happen. Give me a couple minutes. And I just couldn't get a hold of it. But that sour sop cut from Maui Fire Farms was the fucking cheesiest thing I've ever had. It was so fun. It was so good. I was like, dude, I'll trade you anything in my library for it. But they didn't want to get off of it. I think they maybe just didn't like me or something. I don't know why. I try to be, nice and considerate and everything to everybody. But okay, here's another question. Is that product something that works throughout the whole grow? Should you bump it up a little towards the end of flower? That's interesting. Is that product the Calcil? I'm not sure what you're referring to on this question, which product you're referring to. If you're talking about the Calcil, I use the calcium silica pretty much through the whole run. the last product that I showed. Oh, that is, so there's 3 different formulations of the humate fertilizer. So you only use one of them, but it's different formulation for different times of growth. So there's the high nitrogen and humate. This is a high nitrogen formulation. This is used for veg. This has NPK is 1295. It's got 45.45% fulvic acids, 0.76% humic acids. It also contains secondary and micronutrients, but just not in very large quantities. Then we have the complex humate. This is for transition. And this is a 997 formulation, contains 44.3 fulvic acids, 1.6 humic acids. This is for like crops that you just want an even distribution of NPK or when you're in transition. And then for heavy flowering and fruiting crops, the high potassium formulation, which is 6, 10, 12. And then it's 44.3 fulvic acid and 1.63% humic acids. This is a 6% nitrogen. So it still has nitrogen in it. You don't, but it's got far less nitrogen in it. And yeah, they work throughout the whole grow. You can use them in soil and cocoa, DWC, hydro. Advice for killing root aphids? Yes. If you need to kill root aphids, get yourself some Pyganic 5.0, some Beauveria bassiana, which I'm sold out. So please do not order Beauveria bassiana right now. I'll have more in about 10 days. But also the microbe lift biological mosquito control, BMC. I've seen that be efficient and effective against root aphids as well. So I would try those 3 products. You can use them all in conjunction together, and you'll have better efficiency when you're using all 3. Do I still have BT Sports? Yes, I do have BT Sports. I was actually going to announce that. If you guys have caterpillars or anything, go ahead and order the trichoderma or the Bacillus subtilis. Leave at the checkout. Leave it in a note that you want to trade it out for the BT. And the BT is, again, it's spores just like the rest of them. You can just mix it with water and you can spray it on your plant as frequently as you need to. Let's talk bokashi. Tell me how to use it. It's not just a straightforward question. It depends on, like, it's not like there's feeding charts and stuff, but everybody's system's different. Every soil's different. So it's really contingent on your setup. Oh man, I'm not going to be able to get to all these questions. I got a customer here at the office, but I appreciate you guys joining. Remember, Micro Plus is 30% off if you haven't tried this multifunctional soil probiotic. I've talked about some of the benefits of that. I'm going to head out for now. Remember, tonight at 7 p.m. Central, we are going to do a clone auction and a bunch of giveaways. I'm going to be giving away a bunch of stuff. All you have to do is show up, and that is 7 o'clock p.m. Same bat channel, same bat time. Peace out, guys.